I was recently at the Reef Expo in Seattle, Washington, and while I was there, I decided to meet up with someone who I have never met in person before, but know his tanks very well. Let's meet TigaBoy.H20. What's up, coral people? If you're new here, my name is Remy, and this is the Bahama Llama Coral YouTube channel. Just go away. If you're new here, please consider hitting that like button and the subscribe button and hit that bell so you're notified whenever I upload new videos. I had been to Seattle, Washington one time, and it was about 15 years ago. The weather was so crispy, it was awesome. And we got sun, not a whole lot of cloud coverage. It is not like it is here in Missouri where it's super hot. Literally, it is 105 heat index today, and you go outside and it's like instant sweat. My time was really limited there. I was there for less than 36 hours, so we made the best of it. We got a chance to go to the Space Needle, thanks to Sean and George and Fritz. The views out of the Space Needle were pretty awesome. It looks shorter in the skyline when you're like viewing Seattle, the skyline that is. But when you get up there, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm really high. And now all of a sudden afraid of heights? I don't know, it was weird. But really cool views, and I wanna thank George and Sean and the Reef Expo for having me out again. I'm probably gonna do a recap video in the future, maybe spike some of that footage into my next video just so you guys can see what it was like. I got a chance to speak there, so I might post that talk as well. It was kind of similar to my Aquashella talk. I did borrow some things from that, but there was a new element I added in there as well. So while in Seattle, there was one reefer that I really wanted to meet. His name is Dennis. You may know him as TigaBoy.H20 on Instagram. We talked about him before on the channel as I was building the Pico tank, and obviously I've received a lot of inspiration from him. He posts some amazing pictures on Instagram. He's got these little Pico Macroalgae tanks. It's funny, Pico Macro. But he's got these little tiny tanks, and they look so big on Instagram, but in real life, they're so small. He was actually just featured in this magazine. If this is at your LFS, this is the Reef Hobbyist magazine. This is from his tanks, and you can see a whole spread of TigaBoy.H20, aka Dennis's tanks in this magazine. It's pretty cool. He does some really awesome stuff. Thankfully, Dennis was super awesome. He picked me up at the airport. He treated me to some dinner downtown Seattle. So thank you so much, Dennis, for letting me invade your space for a little bit. Let's go see his tanks. All right, we are here. We have made it. This is TigaBoy.H20's lair, aka Dennis. He's gonna remain in the shadows. So Dennis, why don't you come over here?
Yeah.
And let's talk about your tanks that we've seen so many times on Instagram and love and enjoy. Take me through this beautiful masterpiece here.
Yeah.
And why anybody would want to put bubble algae in their tank voluntarily.
That's my showpiece bubble algae right there. Yeah, this is really what started it. This is a UNS 45A. It's one of their all-in-one tanks. This was the first macroalgae tank that I started, over a year and a half ago. But it was basically my proof of concept. It's 9 gallons. I think it's 7-gallon volume in the main part and 2 gallons in the filtration. If you look at my Instagram photos, there's just at first it started off really red heavy with Gracilaria hayi, with some Caulerpa prolifera in there, which is the green macroalgae. But as you can see over time, it's just completely morphed. Like the blue hypnia that started off as a struggling small little clump just took over. So this is like now 80% blue hypnia if you look at this tank. But it's kicking. I mean, it's about a year and a half old now and going strong.
So what's the lighting that, I mean, we've kind of discussed this a little bit on Tyler's tank, the inland_reef coastal tank. You guys use the same lights?
Yeah, so this is it's a freshwater planet tank light. It's a twin star. This one's the 450E, but it's basically full spectrum lighting, and just my personal opinion, I think they do better. Macroalgae does better under full spectrum lighting. So most of my tanks, almost all my tanks are basically full spectrum lighting.
So as far as like filtration on one of these tanks goes, what are you looking at? I mean, is this the filtration? Like this tank is the filtration?
Yeah, that's kind of my philosophy for macroalgae tanks. It's just you don't need to go crazy with filtration because the macroalgae itself.
Do you have anything in the back?
I have some of the bio cubes back there, just a few.
Some floss.
Yep, some floss and floss for mechanical filtration, but that's basically it.
And what is this probe here? You have the ATO, the heater, and or is that just the?
That's the ATO. Yeah,
This
that's
is the ATO?
Yep,
Okay.
that's the Reef Breeders Prism ATO.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's really nothing back here.
Yeah.
But
there's nothing. It's really just mechanical filtration with the filter floss. And it's like, it's pretty fun with macroalgae tanks because you could just, I mean, I could shift the dynamic again, right? I could take out most of the blue hypnia, right? And then like add back in other reds and change the dynamic again further. But
yeah,
I'm kind of digging this right now.
So let's go on to this next tank. How many gallons is this?
Yeah, so this is the UNS 5N and it's only like 4 gallons. So it's pretty tiny. There's gotta be, I don't know, 15 to 17 different species of macroalgae in here. This is as basic as it gets because it's just live rock, you know, the macroalgae, and that little surface skimmer that you see over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that all that runs is more filter floss. It's basically for mechanical filtration, keeps the surface super clean actually. I'm pretty proud of that particular tank, this particular tank that you see, the 5N. And I do spend a lot more time, you know, manicuring that bouquet.
In the hobby, we see a lot of these macroalgae. What's a macroalgae or two in here that maybe took you a little bit longer to find?
Yeah, so the red grape, which is in the forefront, yep, that's Botria claudia. It's also known as red grape. That's kind of seasonal, I noticed, right? So you'll see it come available like in the summertime, but otherwise it's harder to find.
So that one doesn't even have, there's no filtration like in the back at all.
Yeah.
So that's just a fishbowl.
Totally. What next to the red grape though is branching coralline algae, which is pretty cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a rigid branching
over here
coralline.
On the side.
Yep. So there's a bunch of that in there. Yeah, it's like the poor
But this is also one too, right down here?
Yep, that's a finer version of that, but it's like the poor man's SPS.
Cool feather duster. What kind of? Do you choose inverts based on the tank size, or do they just kind of like whatever fits in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty much whatever fits in. I typically do have like hermits in all of these. I just like hermits.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just I have personal preference for hermits. So there's tiny like dwarf zebra hermit, like 1 or 2 in there. There should be a sexy shrimp in there somewhere.
All right, let's move on to the next tank over here. So this is, you said this is your grow out tank.
Yeah.
So in the coral world, you know, we would say the frag tank. This is basically like a frag tank for macroalgae.
Yeah. It's a nice way of saying it's just like my garbage tank where I just throw in, where I just throw in all my.
But it's so beautiful. I mean, look at like this blue hypnia up here. It looks like from a distance, it kind of looks like a hammer coral a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The blue hypnia is interesting because if you look at the bottom of that, like initially it was in that, you know, that little cup.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Initially it was like literally like a hitchhiker piece that I pulled off of my Astrea ninja snail shell, and I just stuck it in that little, you know, cup.
That's fun.
And it just filled up that whole cup, right? It was just packed, and it started growing upwards. And as it grows upwards, it shades the bottom part, right? Like that was in the cup, and that part dies. So it just keeps like growing up. It's kind of interesting growth.
And then you also have, you were explaining to me this pinkish, what is this called again?
String of pearl.
String of pearl macroalgae, and this is a more rare form of macroalgae.
It's definitely harder to find. Oh, it's right next to the molly, you see?
Yeah.
Good shot. That's the money shot. It's like the rarely seen molly. But yeah, it's a species of Botria claudia as well, right? Like the other red grape that I showed you. Definitely less common. I found it really just at a local fish store. I was at a local fish store. You know, they don't sell macroalgae, but they had this, and I was like, I asked them where they got it, and I guess it was just like a tank breakdown, and then someone just happened to have it and brought it in. So was the beneficiary of that luck. But so typically not that easy to find.
Do you find it interesting that somebody else bought that at some point, like, and they live in the area?
Yeah, I mean,
Because
totally.
I feel like you're probably the one of a handful of reefers in the entire like industry that this piece would tickle their fancy.
Yes,
You know what I mean?
Totally. I totally don't. Yeah, I don't meet too many other macroalgae enthusiasts. I suspect it was in a fugue or something, or refugium. I guess.
It's just like it hitchhiked on a live.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I doubt it was a main display or ornamental piece.
We have two newer tanks over here. We'll get to the newest one in a second. But tell me about this little guy.
Yeah, so that's a super shallow tank. It's a UNS 5S. It's really only like 4 inches tall, but it's like 2 gallons. So it's like super shallow and tiny. It's a tiny little Pico. For all my other tanks, I use like live rock, like real maricultured live rock from KP Aquatics. For this one, I use the real Reef Rock brand for this.
Okay.
And it's just what I could find locally. And I try to make this like a cheesy desert themed diorama with the tiger that doesn't fit in with the desert, but, but that's on brand for me. So like I put that in there. But yeah, it's like, so I try to find things that look kind of desert-like, right? So more rigid, right? The key is like rigid, green.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of like Halimeda in there, the pencil cap, the mermaid's fan, and the tufted joint algae, like that. Those are predominantly like the rigid aspects of this. They're all calcified algae. And then I have some of the palm caulerpa in the back too. I know you have a ton of that. You had a ton of that in your Pico.
This to me seems like a very easy explanation of like how to start a macro tank.
Yeah.
So as far as equipment goes, you really only need what, 4 things, right?
Yeah.
So what is this filter and where did you get that?
I actually got that at the Marine Depot liquidation sale, but I think it's a Dymax.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a Dymax Slim Flow. I think they mostly use it in freshwater tanks. But you know, this tank is so small. I had a hard time figure out, filtration options for it. But that's the main source of like mechanical filtration.
That's just running like a floss?
That's it, just floss. And then the light is the Reef Breeders display fugue Pico. So it's supposed to be closer to full spectrum, like 6500K.
Yes.
And then, live rock, right? A lot of live rock in there, and the macroalgae for natural filtration, and live sand.
Yep.
And then something for flow, right? Like a wave. All of them have like some kind of wave maker.
What kind of wave maker is this?
That's
the Hyger?
Yeah, that's the Hyger. That's the one you find on Amazon. But it works great. Like that tiny little. I mean, the controls on that, it's a little hard. There's quite a bit of learning curve on that to get right. But once you do, it like pumps a lot of water for good for like tiny little Pico.
And then the heater, I've always found this to be a hard thing with smaller tanks. Is what wattage do you go with? Is this a 50?
That is a 25. I think. Well, no, that actually is a beta tank heater, right? So I think it's I can't remember what it is, but it's like one of those like beta tank heaters preset, and there's no like internal temperature control. But I have it attached to an Inkbird, I think, which is essential. I mean, for like a Pico especially. So there's an Inkbird set up, and it keeps it at around 76, I think.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna have to dose some things. So what do you? I see you've got like a bevy of Brightwell stuff here.
Yeah.
What are you dosing on those?
Yeah, so definitely need to dose nutrients and major and minor elements for macroalgae, in my opinion, right? I know like other people say you can just do, just like have fish poop, right? Just have a lot of fish and like, feed them, and that should be sufficient.
But it's hard to get fish in these small
Exactly.
tanks, right?
I barely have any fish. So for me, it's harder to, that doesn't really apply. So I do have to dose, or else they'll have no nutrients in there. So keto grow is a form of like fertilizer, right, for macroalgae.
Yep.
And so that has a lot of like trace elements in there. It doesn't have like a source of like for nitrates and phosphates though. So I separately buy the Neophos and Neonitro for it to supply phosphates and nitrates. And then Farian is an iron supplement. Macroalgae definitely need iron. I know keto grow has iron too, but I find that sometimes the iron gets depleted really quickly, so I don't use barium daily, but I use it as needed.
So just take a screenshot of this right now in the video. This is everything you need right here to start your own macro display.
Yeah, the scaping tools too. You need that too.
Yeah. Tell me about this beauty right here.
Yeah, so its predecessor, it was this tank, but it was like a valley scaped macroalgae tank. It was packed to the brim with macroalgae. I did want to redo it though for a while, and I had these mangroves in there, so this is like a mangrove focused tank now. But I did have these mangroves in that tank for almost a year, and they were like tucked away in the back left corner, and like no one could even see them, and they had like a crappy light over them. But I wanted to make them the star, so I moved them to the front, and I kind of set up this scape to highlight the mangroves.
Yeah.
Did this big slope, right, so I can get them up higher. And then I put a AI prime freshwater over them to give them, better light and some controllability in the light schedule. And then on the left side, I do want to eventually put coral in there when this tank's ready. Like I do want to put coral and more macroalgae too. So I put in the AI prime Reef version, the saltwater version, on the left side. And so
that's cool. So you have a fresh AI prime and a salt.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it creates like I think an interesting contrast, right, in the color spectrum when you look at it.
Yeah.
Like, even just if you look pan left to right,
It's
like
very orange warm over here,
Yeah.
and a little cooler on this side.
yeah, totally. It's like the sunlight, bright sun, and then like the
Yeah.
actual the ocean, right? So it has
It's
like
the ocean.
yeah. So that it's simple setup too. It has the Nero 3.
Little nicer pump over
Yeah.
here.
Yep, nicer pump.
Nicer heater.
Nicer heater, that's right. That's the Neotherm. I think that's a 75 watt. And I have another Neo 3 that I might use because I'm trying to keep the sand pushing up the slope. I don't know if that's going to work, but I'm trying to have like the sand being pushed up the slope.
Yeah.
So I thought about doing like 2 Neo 3s in there.
So you're going to put coral in this. Any ideas on what that's going to be?
I mean, initially I was thinking of trying to, because the mangroves and macroalgae. A lot of the macroalgae I get is basically from Florida, right? Florida waters.
Yeah.
So I wanted to try to focus on maybe Florida specific, right, inhabitants. But it creates a nice visual look, right? I mean, it's really shallow and sometimes impractical in terms of like stocking, but it definitely has a nice like visual appeal, and it has like I have like the 2 shallows next to each other, like. The 5S to the left is basically like looks like a miniature version, right, of the with the same proportions.
So I guess if there's any kind of tips that you would get to or give to anybody that wants to do the saltwater planted tank, what would that be?
Yeah,
because I think initially, for me when I first started, I was finding it hard to keep the nutrients high.
Yeah, that's the biggest challenge I think, keeping nutrients up, because nutrients will quickly be depleted, right? Like if you don't do anything and you think, oh, I'm just gonna feed a little bit more, and and you do your test and you realize, oh, everything's zeroed out, right? Nitrates, phosphates, iron. So I think you do, if you want a like thriving macroalgae tank, I really recommend dosing, and that's similar to the freshwater planted tank world too, right? Like they use. They have like CO2, they have fertilizers, they have various means to like ensure that macroalgae is thriving. So I don't think it's just a simple matter of like fish poop, which could work for some, but not all. I think macroalgae tanks. I think the lighting is important too, right? I think getting the lighting is tricky because I mentioned before, too much light and they're not going to do well. Like the reds can burn out, right? If you put too much light and dull out. And so I know people have reef lights over macroalgae tanks, and initially like reef lights are pretty powerful, right? And they're meant to be. And so like they'll think, oh, it's fine, and then they'll notice the macroalgae like paling out, losing color, and that could be a reason. So I think like dialing that in. I know I have reef lights and AIs over my new tank, but I'm going to see how it goes and adjust intensity as necessary. So having like some controllability I think is helpful when to adjust the lights to meet the needs of your macro.
Well, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram. I'm all over, but I'm mostly on Instagram. My handle is TigaBoy.H20. Also on Facebook too, and and some other platforms, but Instagram is where you can mostly find me. I'm always happy to chat, so feel free to DM me. I may be a little behind on DMs, but
Congratulations on this, by the way.
oh, thank you.
It was so cool to see this issue in my local fish store.
Yeah, that was really fun. Doing the not just the cover, but doing the article, right? Like where I got to like make a case for macroalgae.
So here's the, this is the, what, 5-gallon tank?
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the stuff that we just talked about is right here.
Yeah, so like I basically like, it's kind of like a advocacy for macroalgae keeping or macroalgae tanks.
Yeah.
As like a growing niche, right? I mean, I think it is growing, and it's totally fun seeing it. Like I go on Instagram and see new macroalgae tanks pop up all the time, and so like how big is it going to get? I don't know, but at least it's fun because it's at the forefront right now.
Well, Dennis, I really appreciate your time, and thank you for letting me invade your home, and this is really a treat to see, so thank you so much.
Pleasure having you. Thank you.
I want to thank Dennis from the bottom of my heart. I know he's not a man of the camera, doesn't like to be in front of the camera, so very happy that he let me into his house and see those tanks. They're pretty amazing. If that isn't inspiration to start into the macroalgae world, I really don't know what is. It's awesome that the reefing community is so welcoming in most cases, and I cannot wait to see what Dennis is up to next. With his tanks and influence, there's been a rise of macroalgae tanks in the hobby, and it's so cool because it's just one of those different facets that we always talk about, one of those offshoots that you can go from just having a mixed reef in your house, which is already cool, but then a different style tank that you can also have in your home. And it doesn't need to be big. And Dennis is always willing to answer questions, so make sure to find him on Instagram, TigaBoy.H20. If you could, do me a favor right now, and if you like today's video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification so you know whenever I post new videos and nude videos. That'll never happen. As always, want to give a huge shout out to Scott Crow and the entire OSA crew over there. While you're in a subscription mode, make sure to go on over to the OSA media page, Ocean State Aquatics YouTube channel, and hit subscribe over there as well, because they are still constantly posting new content on a weekly basis. Oh, so the last video I introduced you to our new puppies. I think that was the last video. Luna and Maggie, they're keeping us very busy. Just crapping everywhere. You know what puppies do? They just, whenever they feel the urge, they just go. But we also got a new non-fish pet in the house. One second. This, that is Waffles. Is that focusing? I think this is a tangerine leopard gecko. He's pretty cool. Just got a new shed, so he is like super orange and probably hating all of this light, so I'm gonna go ahead and put him back. But this is my son's pride and joy. They are loving on this thing, and he's so docile, so nice. Hey, thank you for joining me today on another video. Still kind of waiting on some news, so we'll get to that soon. And I think that's it. All right, I'm gonna go have a brewski and enjoy my weekend. Hopefully you do the same, or whenever this video finds you. Just have a great day. Just, make it a good one. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you next week.